Hello, this is Erin Crosby and welcome to my 3D documentation. Over this past year, I've been working in and learning how to use Maya so that I might be able to use its tools and techniques in the industry in the future. To kick off the process of my 3D, I began thinking about a character. I immediately decided that I wanted my character to have unrealistic and stretched proportions and thought immediately of the artist Jamie Hewlett. I specifically started looking at the Gorillaz music videos where they had used 3D models. I began looking into the ways that they had incorporated Jamie Hewlett's 2D drawings into 3D, and from there I quickly drew a character of my own. With my character having such long limbs, I knew I wanted to have a story that involved something monstrous. I thought of ideas like a living doll, zombie, or a witch, and eventually settled on somewhat of a witch. I also decided to give my character a purple colour palette and wanted the whole room and everything else to have the same palette. Although I did want the voodoo doll to stand out a little, and so I added a little bit of a light colour to him. I wanted my overall story to be fairly easy as I knew I'd have to learn how to animate different things. I also kept my character to one room and made sure that I was mostly only animating the upper body of the character. The story itself would focus on Kat in her room, while her sister would tell her to turn her music down. I wanted the voodoo doll to represent Kat's anger towards her sister, where she would take out all these different punishments on the voodoo doll, with no success. I really wanted to play with movements in her upper body, her eyes, and her face to display expression. I also wanted to experiment with different camera angles and point of view shots. After I proposed my story, I began to move on to building my character. Beginning the process of shaping out and making the body for my character was a very big learning curve for me. Maya confused me a lot during this process, but I had a lot of fun learning about everything. The face in general took up a lot of time as I wanted to make sure that all of the detail was in the upper body. One of my flaws when creating all of my body parts for the cat was keeping everything in third mode where everything was rounded and inaccurate to how it actually looked. This made it frustrating because I would often find myself wondering what was wrong with my project and then realizing that things were looking really horribly wrong in the first mode. My main inspiration for the head itself was from Mattel Creations sculpting. I have always been really influenced by Monster High, and the doll heads were very helpful for the way that I created Kat's head. I was especially proud of the lips and eyelids for my character. One issue I ran into when creating the head was the pigtails. My pigtails were too complicated, and although I spent a very long time on them, I soon realized that it would be too much. Chris was able to easily help me fix this, and it only took him about 5 minutes to make the pigtails. This was pretty gutting, but I was glad that I could finally carry on with the rest of Kat's body. Kat's body didn't take me as long as her head. I only wish that I added more detail to her character's lower body, as I felt like eventually things began looking pretty plain, while her face and hair looked a lot more detailed. After the body was properly modelled, I was able to split everything up into UVs, and I feel like this process could have been a lot easier if I didn't split things up as much as I did, as I found that each nail was split into its own UV shell, and this made things a lot more difficult further along. I ended up having to colour in Kat twice, as I lost the first file for her shirt and hair, but I am happier with the second time that I coloured her in. After finishing all of this, I realised how far behind the rest of the class I was, and I quickly had to catch up on rigging. I found the rigging process fairly easy, while some of my friends had a lot of trouble with it. My favourite part of the rigging was actually moving the eyelids and eyebrows and mouth around, as I was able to make some really fun expressions with my character. I also really enjoyed learning how to get the lighting working, as it created some really fun shots. The first asset I created was Kat's bed. This one was not my proudest. I feel like I could have spent a lot more time on it, and then eventually I did. I completely scrapped my first idea and then went to YouTube to find a whole bunch of tutorials. Unfortunately, I didn't document this process with OBS as much as I would have liked, because I really did learn quite a lot from this process, like lighting the lamps, making different types of assets, making things furry, and doing more lighting and UV shell work. I only wish that I had found these tutorials earlier. After adding a few finishing touches to Kat's room like the posters and the lighting, I was quite happy with how it was looking, and I could finally move on to working on the weapons and the doll. I was also able to find out ways to change the presets for the move tool, rotate tool, and all other tools, where I could make it so that it would move everything at once instead of moving things separately into different directions. In keeping the limbs separate from the body on the voodoo doll, I was able to make it look like it was rigged by creating the pivot points closer to the body and moving them separately. I considered adding extra little details like small tufts of hair, but decided against it ultimately. In working on Kat's room, I had found different ways of using the UV generator. I was able to automatically generate the UVs, and going into edge mode and then clicking on separate edges, I was able to see where it would line up and then connect them. This was very easy when bringing it into Substance Painter and made it a lot quicker. I brought the doll into Substance Painter and had a lot of fun creating the small shapes and patterns for him. At this point, I was really running out of time for my project and realized I would need to spend all of my time animating. I quickly had to learn everything about animating my character and setting up scenes. I began by bringing in my animatic format in Premiere Pro and then going into different scenes in Maya and creating all of the shots. Unfortunately, I didn't record much of this process in OBS as I was really rushing to get things done. I was very proud of this shot, however, because I was able to make the voodoo doll look very fluid and realistic. This shot here was where things really took a turn. It was all looking good until I decided to make her head move. While I'd run into small issues with Kat's rig, such as her eye controller not being connected to her face, I hadn't run into anything like this. This was a very, very crushing mistake, as it seems like there's something wrong with my rig. Maya just couldn't handle animating her head moving. I tried setting the project and fixing it about 5 times before I eventually gave up. Thankfully, I realized that I had a backup saved and I was able to keep some progress from the shot. This was still very devastating, however, because it meant that I couldn't animate her head moving in any of my shots. Another big obstacle when I was animating was halfway through, or even more than halfway through, all of the textures in all 22 of my shots had randomly gone missing, and I had to reconnect all the files. I am very thankful that I was able to animate it all, however, because it seemed like there were a few people in my class who weren't able to. Unfortunately, I did run out of time to completely render my project, although one of my scenes had completely crashed and was just lost after I play blasted it. This means that only 21 out of 22 of my shots could have been rendered in the first place. Another obstacle I ran into outside of Maya was the Playblast files not building a proper index and being able to be taken into Premiere Pro. This was a big problem, and I found out it was because the files were somehow too big and I had to limit my frames to only 150. Out of frustration, I was taking breaks to work on the sound, and eventually I was very happy with how the sound turned out in my animation. The animation itself took the longest and was the most frustrating, while putting in the sounds and working on the credits was the easiest and most relaxing. I did make a few errors, however, when I was finishing my project, such as saying narration instead of voice acting, and having the wrong title for my animation. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how my idea turned out. I only wish that I managed my time a little better, as I found that all year I was very behind everyone else. I would love to experiment more with 3D, as I really enjoyed creating the assets and the character for my project. It did take me a long time to wrap my head around Maya, and I know that I still don't fully understand things, but I do see errors in a lot of the things I was doing at the beginning. I also wish that I developed my character a little more, because I feel like I just rushed into creating the story and character. I do wish I had spent more time on Kat's room and her clothing and her whole character in general, as I would have liked to put more and more assets into her room. I also wish that I had time to learn more about how to render my project. It would have been rewarding to see how all the colours popped. I think I will come back to 3D in future and practice more bringing my 2D characters into the program, as I would like to know how to use these skills so that I can use them in the industry. Although I never did get the chance to render, I did fix the title name and the narration part at the end. So here is the final project. Thank you for listening.